Hello, my name is Brady Chambers, and I'm an occupational health specialist with Very Good Building and Development in Pawnee, Indiana. I have my Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, and a Master's of Public Health specializing in environmental and occupational health from the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Today, we will be discussing UV exposure in a construction occupation. Before we begin, I would like to thank your Contractors Association for having me here today. Let's get started. Today we will discuss origination, sources, and types of UV radiation and how these apply within the contractor occupation, discuss the acute and chronic health effects of UV radiation exposure, and discuss on-the-job UV radiation control measures. First, we will begin by discussing UV radiation as a whole. UV light is a type of electromagnetic radiation, and therefore is a part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Electromagnetic radiation is transmitted in the form of waves according to frequency or wavelength and is measured in nanometers. The electromagnetic spectrum, however, ranges from 1 picometer to 100 millimeters. The electromagnetic spectrum includes gamma rays, X-rays, UV light, visible light, IR rays, radar waves, microwaves, TV waves, and radio waves. Each type of ray or wave in the electromagnetic spectrum can cause different effects on humans. For example, gamma rays are used to kill cancer cells for cancer treatment. UV radiation in particular is part of the electromagnetic spectrum that is between X-rays and visible light. It ranges from approximately 40 nanometers to 400 nanometers. UV radiation is unobservable in nature and is absorbed wholly or in part by the atmosphere. There are three types of UV radiation: UVA, UVB, and UVC, which we will discuss in more detail in the slides to come. We know that when radiation passes through the atmosphere, all UVC and most of the UVB radiation is absorbed by a combination of oxygen, ozone, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. The first type of UV radiation is UVA. It ranges from 315 to 400 nanometers, and it is the most common type of UV radiation. This is because approximately 95% of UV radiation reaches the Earth's surface. UVA is necessary for human synthesis of vitamin D. However, it can't penetrate into the deepest layers of the skin. It is also responsible for immediate tanning effects. UVB is the second type of UV radiation. It is medium wavelength and ranges from 280 to 315 nanometers. UVB is unable to penetrate beyond superficial skin layers, approximately the first and second layers of the dermis. UVB is very biologically active and is necessary for the synthesis of vitamin D as well. Because UVB is so biologically active, it can cause photochemical damage to cellular DNA, which we will discuss more at length later. UVC is the final type of UV radiation. It ranges from 180 to 280 nanometers and is considered short wavelength UV radiation. Although UVC is the most damaging type of UV radiation, it is absorbed in the atmosphere and does not reach the surface of the Earth. If UVC does come in contact with human skin, it will be absorbed by the outer layers. One cannot have a conversation about UV radiation without discussing ozone as well. This is because ozone is a significant absorber of UV radiation. Recall in earlier slides where we discussed about how most UVB and UVC radiation is absorbed by the atmosphere. This includes ozone. It has come to the attention of the scientific community that holes in the ozone have been created as the ozone layer begins and continues to thin. Therefore, as the ozone layer thins more, UV radiation can penetrate through the atmosphere, exposing humans to higher levels of UV radiation, especially UVB and UVC, which does not usually penetrate through the atmosphere. These holes have been found in Antarctica, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, and North America. UV radiation causes ionization because it contains enough energy to break chemical bonds. Ionization occurs because UV photons cause electrons to break free of their atoms, which changes the chemical properties of the atoms and allows them to form bonds that they otherwise would not. One example of this is thymine dimers. Thymine dimers occur when UV radiation comes in contact with the skin and causes two adjacent thymine base pairs in the same strand of DNA to bind with each other, and not the adenine that they should pair with on the other DNA strand. This dimer formation causes a mutation that can cause skin cancers. The sun is the primary source of UV radiation. Approximately 10% of sunlight is UV light, and 1/3 of this penetrates to the Earth's surface. Artificial sources of UV radiation include tanning beds, black lights, some lasers, cancer treatments, other medical sources like dental lamps, and lighting in the home. However, lighting in the home is not a significant source of UV radiation. Next, we are going to discuss the primary health effects of UV radiation. Keep in mind that each source of UV radiation has its own unique hazards, and although extreme UV exposure can cause significant health problems, some UV exposure is essential for good health. For example, UV helps humans synthesize vitamin D. If babies are not exposed to enough sunlight, they can develop a syndrome called rickets. Rickets is caused from extreme vitamin D deficiency and softens the growth plates at the end of children's bones and can lead to skeletal deformities. Some acute health effects of UV radiation include snow blindness, severe sunburn, erythema, or reddening and itching of the skin, tanning, photokeratitis, and conjunctivitis. Photokeratitis is a condition in which the cornea becomes inflamed, causing pain in the eye, watering, and blurred vision. Conjunctivitis is the inflammation of the membrane that covers the inside of the eyelids and the sclera, or the conjunctiva, which becomes swollen and produces tears and discomfort but does not usually affect vision. Chronic health effects of UV radiation include photosensitivity, letogens, moles, cancers of the eye, cataracts, and skin cancer. Photosensitivity is a condition in which a person is particularly sensitive to the sun's UV rays and can occur in conjunction with certain dermatologic and rheumatologic disorders or because of other pharmaceutical drug use. Letogens, or solar brown spots, which appear as flat brown areas that are usually no larger than 0.5 centimeters. These could also be known as age spots. Moles are growths of pigmented cells that usually begin in the lower layers of the epidermis and extend later into the dermis. Cataracts are the leading cause of blindness worldwide and are caused by a loss of transparency of the lens of the eye. Skin cancers affect light-skinned people the most. They can cause thymine dimers, which we already discussed. The most common types of skin cancer are basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma, which are rarely fatal. Actinic keratosis is the leathery, wrinkled appearance and loss of skin elasticity, which serves as a precursor to squamous cell carcinomas and can occur due to UV radiation. Skin cancers also include malignant melanoma, which is the main cause of skin cancer death. Malignant melanomas occur most in those with fair skin, large numbers of moles, red or blonde hair, tendency to freckle, to sunburn and not to tan on sun exposure. And contributing risk factors include acute burning episodes and chronic occupational and recreational exposure. Symptoms of acute and chronic health effects of UV radiation can be exacerbated by use of birth control pills, antidepressants, anti-dandruff shampoos, and some cosmetics. There are multiple factors affecting UV exposure, including time of year and time of day, latitude, altitude, clouds and haze, ozone, exposure geometry, and exposure duration. UV levels vary with the height of the sun in the sky and are especially high during the summer months and from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. daily. UV levels are also higher closer to the equator. With an increase in altitude, there's a decrease in the atmosphere that is available to absorb the UV radiation. With every increase of 1,000 meters in latitude, UV levels increase by approximately 10%. UV levels are highest under cloudless skies, and generally, clouds reduce UV exposure. However, light or thin clouds have little effect and could enhance UV exposures due to a phenomenon known as scattering, in which the water within the cloud reflects the sun rays into a different pattern. Many surfaces reflect the UV radiation and can add to overall UV exposure. The grass, soil, and water reflect less than 10%. Sand reflects approximately 15%. Fresh snow is a particularly good reflector and almost doubles a person's UV exposure. As discussed previously, ozone absorbs some of the sun's radiation that would otherwise reach the Earth's surface. Body sites will receive different amounts of exposure depending on their orientation to the sun and on reflection from ground surfaces. Finally, the time exposed to UV radiation can significantly increase the impact of the UV radiation. It is important to protect yourself on the job to prevent acute and chronic effects of UV radiation. This can be done by wearing eye protection, specifically UV protection sunglasses, shielding yourself from the sun's rays by using shade or canopies, wearing protective clothing including long pants, wide-brimmed hats, and long-sleeve shirts. It is especially important for persons affected by baldness to remember to wear hats, as the skin on the head has little protection from the UV rays and can develop skin cancers easily. Wearing sunscreen is also important. Sunscreens should be greater than SPF 30 and should be applied frequently. It is also important to avoid the midday sun, specifically from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Also, the UV index is a good indicator of the level of UV radiation and should be taken into account when working outdoors. When the UV index is 0 to 2, the UV exposure is low. At this point in time, minimal sun protection is required for normal activity. When the UV exposure is moderate, with a UV index of 3 to 5, precautions should be taken, especially if you will be outside for more than 30 minutes. When the UV index is 6 to 7, the UV exposure is high, and sunburns can be caused easily. Significant sun protection should be taken. Very high UV exposure or UV index of 8 to 10 signifies that extra precautions should be taken because skin can be damaged easily and burn quickly. A UV index of 11 plus indicates extreme UV exposure, and skin can burn in minutes, so extreme precautions should be taken. The UV index has been known to reach 14 or more within the southern United States, so keep the location of your worksite and the UV index in mind while working. Other things that can be done to manage risks of UV exposure within the workplace include engineering controls, administrative controls, personal protective equipment, and training. Engineering controls that can be taken include shade cover and canopies. Administrative controls include performing duties outside of peak UV radiation hours and moving jobs inside when possible. We have already discussed extensive personal protective equipment precautions that can be taken within the workplace. Finally, training ensures understanding of risks and what is expected of employees in the workplace, which is what we're doing now. The International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection and the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists publishes UV radiation exposure limits. UV radiation exposure limits are wavelength dependent and range from 3 millijoules per centimeter squared to 100,000 millijoules per centimeter squared. And you can see the exposure limit recommendations for each type of UV radiation below. If you feel that you have been overexposed to UV radiation, there are some measures you can take, but no matter whether it is skin or eye exposure, one should ultimately seek medical attention. For skin overexposure, protect the skin from further direct sunlight and apply cold water to the affected areas before seeking medical attention. For eye overexposure, place a sterile dressing over the eye and seek medical attention. Thank you all for your attention today, and if anyone has any questions, please let me know.